Thank you all for joining us this morning in this intense discussion. Get the puns out of the way now on how we use process intensification really as a means to achieve some of those targets I think that Dave Tudor set for us in the plenary this morning. For those who don't know me, my name is Mark Talford. I'm Deputy Director of Medicines Manufacturing Programmes at Innovate UK, a role I've been in now for about 2.5 years, but prior to that I spent, the thick end of 20 years overall in this industry and a good few years beforehand in another heavily regulated industry where we try a lot to separate the people from the process and the product, and where I think it's fair to say there's a desire to look at process intensification, but actually how you achieve it is quite challenging. I won't name the industry itself, but I'll just mention the word Sellafield, and that will give you a clue. But in the 20 or so years now that I've been in the pharma sector, I guess my first foray really into batch process intensification was through European projects, and I've been involved in a number of those from the early noughties onwards. And you can kind of see a lot about the opportunity. There's been a lot of technical development. I think through those types of collaborative interactions, we learned quite a lot about what to do, probably even more so perhaps about what not to do in terms of applications of PI for some of the types of process that we're interested in. I guess most of the focus of some of those activities was around small molecule, but obviously we're now looking at new modalities as well, and I think that gives us new challenges and new opportunities. One of the things I think we sort of observed, and there was a really interesting case study, I guess, as part of the F3 factory project, which for those with long enough memories of the days when we were in Europe, and Framework 7, I think in particular, was what funded F3. There was an interesting case study carried out by Bayer, who were the project coordinator, and they were looking at bringing a 5-stage API process into intensified modular setup. And what we didn't realise until very late on in the project was they were actually doing that on a live compound, and they were doing it in parallel with the team that was developing the very traditional batch process in their multipurpose pilot plant. And a lot of information exchange went on, and I think it was quite interesting talking to the guys at Bayer at the end of that, who said we actually used a lot of the work we did on the F3 factory project to help improve the process understanding of the batch process. And it was still the batch process that I believe went to market, but they were able to learn a lot from what our contributions to the European Commission's budget were helping part pay them to do. But it's interesting that the project, the process they took to market was still the one that came via the traditional batch multi-purpose route. And we know these things are incredibly flexible. We know that scale-up is very well understood from lab to pilot plant to manufacturing in these types of facilities. But a bit like me as a process engineer, sometimes I might be referred to as a jack of all trades and a master of none. And I think that's probably the thing about the batch process, is that it is perhaps a jack of all trades and a master of none. And we compromise the way we scale these processes up in terms of the conditions in order to make them work in as efficient as we can way, but targeting the quality and yield that we need for commercial manufacture. And supported by, I guess, the supply chain that is very much based around make to stock, and that has its benefits and drawbacks. But I guess from an Innovate UK perspective, and then going back to some of the things that Ian McCubbin was saying in the first session this morning, I guess the pandemic and the response to the pandemic, I think identified a number of potential opportunities where the time might now be right for process intensification. How do we perhaps look at some of these alternative supply chain models? Do they need us to think about different ways in which we manufacture? Does that mean we must start to move towards distributed manufacturing models? And is that one of the things that maybe gets process intensified technologies for our sector over the line. The other thing, of course, that is on everybody's radar at the moment is net zero, resource efficiency, carbon footprint. And again, if we look at the way that we manufacture our products today, there are challenges, I think, around how we address some of those net zero targets. And again, does that one of the things then that finally enables us to get PI technology really off the ground in this sector? And those really are some of the things that I'm hoping that we explore during this this panel session this morning. So, and again, when I was thinking about a way as to how we might structure the conversation, I started to think about some of the things I mentioned already. And what are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the opportunities? And what are the threats? So to structure the discussion we're going to have in the panel this morning, I'm going to try and use a little bit of SWOT technique and just to pick up on a few things, and then we'll come to some audience-led discussion as we get towards the end. So without further ado, I'm going to ask my panellists to say a little bit about themselves, a little bit more than the Cilla Black introduction. So for those fans of late 80s, early 90s Saturday night TV, a little bit more than the what's your name and where do you come from. But I'm going to just move along to my left. I'm going to start with John Paul. So JP.
Hi everyone, JP Sherlock. If you haven't come across me before, I head up an advanced manufacturing technology group within AstraZeneca. For global operations. So the purpose of that group is really to identify, develop, industrialize, and then ultimately implement manufacturing technologies within our global supply network, ensuring that the network is fit for the future. So it effectively looks at pipeline trends, business requirements, matches those, and produces roadmaps and develops technologies that will, as I say, be ready for the new products coming to market and some of the pressures on how we do that. I'm a chemical engineer by background. I've worked for AstraZeneca for 25 years, and in that capacity, I've basically done most roles within AstraZeneca's sort of development group. So worked across drug substance and drug product, even into devices. Smart devices. I've worked across most clinical phases, had opportunity to take products through to market, but I think my passion is really in that industrialization, commercialization phase where you really are preparing a product and getting it to market, getting it into the hands of patients, and the opportunity we've got at the moment is that's happening faster than ever before, and we really need to be, as a CMC organisation or as a process development organisation, responding to that acceleration. Otherwise, we'll be the ones that are holding things up. So nice to be here. Thank you.
Gareth.
Hi everyone. My name's Gareth Jenkins. I'm VP for Science and Technology at Quotient Sciences. So Quotient Sciences, we are a drug development and manufacturing accelerator. So we're very interested in using science and technology to really innovate the way we help our pharmaceutical clients accelerate, make molecules to cure fast. That's our tagline. I'm an organic chemist by training. I've been working at our drug substance site, which is in the northeast of England, for about 5 years, and we've very successfully applied some process intensification to really help us demonstrate how we can accelerate early development of drug substance, but then dovetail it into formulation development, clinical trials manufacture. We then have a clinical site in Nottingham where we'll actually run the clinical trials, do the bioanalysis, get the feedback using our data sciences team, and feed that all the way back into did we design the right drug, the right formulation, and we do really rapid test, make, do cycles. And that's really where I think we'll focus some of the discussions on where we've used PI today.
Lovely. Di.
Good morning. Thank you, Mark. Good morning. Di Hayward, Chief Executive of Micropore Technologies. Micropore Technologies is primarily a formulation technology company, and we offer a technology where ESG is core to what we can do, so we can save an awful lot of energy, like about 85%, 90% compared with traditional techniques. We've been around for 20 years this year, but the last two have been a real roller coaster, 2 or 3 years, because of RNA, because of LNPs, lipid nanoparticles, all courtesy of the RNA vaccine. So at the moment, I've got a couple of guys in just completing an installation exercise at Samsung Biologics, and we're currently building a 1 billion dose plant, which will go into an eastern country. I'm not going to say any further than that. And that is intensive because that has a size of 1 metre by 1 metre by half a metre.
Thank you, Di. Chris?
Difficult to beat that, Di.
Well, you know.
I'm Chris van der Wal, pleased to meet you all. I'm Edinburgh Centre Director of the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult. The centre's brand new. It was opened this May. We've spent the last 18 months design, installation, operational qualification and so on. It focuses on immune cells and pluripotent stem cells. Maybe in the future we'll do some AAV work as well. But we're essentially the small group of this larger cell and gene therapy, which of course is headed up in Guy's and Stevenage, GMP, and also Braintree for vaccines AAV work. My background is part academia and part large pharma, but I've always focused on pharmaceutics. I was once a pharmacist, a very bad one, and I rapidly left to enter academia. I'll leave it to that, thank you.
And Rolf?
All right, good morning. Rolf Hemminga. I'm the VP of Sales of our systems and software organization, whereby life science is one of the most important parts for our industry and involved in delivering and building an architecture based on hardware and software to drive the challenges of the industry, from R&D to data analytics and making decisions. I'm a electrical and computer science engineer by trade, and I started my career actually by implementing one of the first MES systems at Merck in the Netherlands. And that's, I think, a complete different environment about 30 years ago than when we talk about data and MES systems today. So interesting to see how that will evolve in a discussion.
Lovely, thank you. So going back to that SWOT analysis then, I'm going to start with the strengths, and I'm going to come to Di first, who I think in his introduction has set us up very nicely for this first question. I mean, I mentioned in my introduction to the topic, I've been involved in projects in process intensification for 20 years. And it feels to me like we've got a very broad range of technologies available now, both across synthesis, across formulation, that are real enablers for a step change towards an intensified manufacturing supply chain. But from the technology perspective, Di, do you think that's right? Are we in the place where we have all of the tools to help us move forward in this space?
I'm not sure we've got all of the tools. There are some parts of a typical process which are still, I think, missing or need further work. But I'm really struck by, if you like, some of the common themes from that question, if you like, from the first session we had in this room earlier today. And it's not sufficient to just have a clever widget. We found that ourselves. Having a clever widget and waving it around and saying, look what we can do, is all well and good, but it doesn't get you all the way, because you've got to have a complete solution. And a complete solution involves more than just your clever bit of technology. It needs to be integrated into something else so that you've got the ability to solve the customer's problem. And that now includes, as we heard from the first session, integration with data. It includes getting the people on board, because again, it's about making sure that people buy into the value that change can bring. So I've been around far too long, so I've seen all sorts of clever widgets that promise the earth, but actually making the business case for them is the real challenge, I think.
I think that's an interesting point that we might pick up later in the conversation. I guess, Chris, from your sort of background in biologics and now, I guess, advanced therapies, what do you see there as the opportunities for process intensification at the large scale? Again, do you think we have all of the tools, or are there gaps?
So biologics and advanced therapies, I'll need to give two answers if that's all right, Mark.
No problem.
Biologics, and if you look at the antibody world, 1990s you could generate 100 milligrams or so per litre, then 10, 15 years later looking at 5 grams per litre, now looking at 25 grams per litre. And of course there you've got genetic manipulation of the host, the CHO cell, you've got perfusion culture, and downstream of course you've got far better capture and affinity columns. So all of that has to come together, just like you say, Di. It was a combination of all those rather than just the one particular widget as you described it. But in the ATMP field, we're still very much in the early days, and it's not so much intensification so much as closure of the open manipulation processes. So in cell culture, if I want to grow at scale some pluripotent stem cells, I'll obviously first got to thaw the little vial that comes out of the liquid nitrogen tank, and I've got to allow the cells to recover in a small tea flask. That's very much a manipulation that's in the biosafety cabinet, so it's open. And finally, if I'm lucky and the cells are quite happy, you'll put those into a bioreactor. And of course, there's now in these early stages fairly, I'd say, whether it's 3D or 2D, a lot of optimization to do. And whether or not can you interrogate the growth of the cells in that bioreactor as well. Is it very much a black box, sometimes quite literally, or a box where you can put in some analytics? A process analytical technology would come to play there. And I think that looking at the smart evolution that you saw in the mAb world, I think will eventually come to cell therapy. But it's what do we measure and when? It's a bit more complicated. But mainly it's closure of open processes.
Again, I think some interesting points there around kind of PAT aspects and what they bring that we'll pick up later, I think, in the discussion. Again, in my opening to this session, I said one of the things I think we have to bear in mind is that out there in the real world, we have a lot of installed capacity in multi-purpose batch plant. And Di mentioned in his response to my opening question there about the challenges around the business case. So I'm going to come to you on this one, JP. Where are we at? I mean, I remember a discussion, I guess it was the ISCMP probably 2 years ago now, where one of the key things was around, the technologies for some of these things are there. It's how we make the business case. Where do you think we as a sector are now in terms of being able to make the business case to make some of the investments in intensified processing?
So I think we are moving, and probably like all things in this industry, it does take time or need some level of disruption. As you say, we have a very much an installed base of technology, and I think the key thing about, as people have referenced, is that they are platforms. A lot of the investments that we make are very much project driven, and I think where we're seeing an opportunity is as we switch, or if we start to invest at a platform level rather than waiting for a project to come to bring it. And that's particularly true in the formulation side. So I think where you see actually real movement, and I think the industry almost as a whole moving in that direction towards the adoption of continuous direct compression and starting to think about more modular platforms for oral solid dose. Within that space, it's very much a platform type technology. You can make a tablet. They may look different. Formulators might try and convince you that there's very good reasons for coming up with different formulations, but broadly, you have a single platform technology. You can look across your pipeline and say, well, we've got X amount of oral solid dose products coming through. This technology can be used. It's the right technology. API is more complicated, but I think that type of thinking needs to be adopted for it to really start to build the kit business case, which is driving for a single platform with modularity. So we know we put APIs together in a kind of sequence of different steps, and we can construct those steps in a certain way. There is much more opportunity to standardize certain transformations, make use of technology in a certain way. So possibly the biggest challenge we've got in intensifying our API production is that change in the way that we design processes and put those processes together. But again, it's happening. I think there's multiple examples of us doing that. The bottom line, I think we kind of touched upon it, is this isn't a technology business case. The industry is not going to simply move to a different manufacturing technology on the basis of slightly increased yield for certain steps or maybe some slight productivity gain. We have to lift that business case up, and it has to be impacted by other things. So I think increasingly looking at how we actually manufacture end to end. Some of us were part of a remedies program where we actually understood how long a pharmaceutical supply chain is and the different opportunities to really collapse that time. really started to change the way we put those supply chains together, consider how we turbocharge the manufacturing of our processes, reduce the lead time associated with those manufacturers, potentially having an impact on our inventory, our stock levels, etc., as you referred to, things that are actually going to move the needle on the cost base of our supply chains. And unless we start proposing our business cases based on that, as opposed to a kind of bottom-up technology-driven solution, it's not going to be. They're not going to move. So, and I think the other things that are real changes over the last few years, one, the net zero piece. So again, process intensification, its truest form is removal of waste. So we're taking out time, resources, potentially steps, really trying to drive for optimal chemistry. That optimal chemistry and API may well actually require us to do very different chemistries, open up new space. So the sustainability is a driver for enhanced driver for process intensification. Digitalization, many of these technologies are reliant on having a better data stream, better understanding, but the digitalization then offers a whole new set of opportunities that we can then build a case around. And then the final piece in that intensification for me is the reduction in size. And again, kind of leans into some of the sustainability aspects. You're not blowing air through huge rooms to do this, but also we're seeing this reduction in the volumes of our medicines. Yeah, so we can actually go directly from a pilot scale production into a commercially manufacturing scale solution without scale up. You've intensified a business process by doing it. So those for me are the things that we are now changing, but we have to kind of come back in our business cases always to a business process that's been intensified rather than a technology manufacturing process.
Yeah. And Gareth, I mean, you've been on that journey. You sort of outlined that in your introduction. So, I guess what were your experiences along that, and how does it sort of support what JP's been saying?
So, everything JP said, I recognise it. There's lots of technology. I don't think it is a technology problem now. It is definitely around the mindset, the way you approach doing business, the way you think about developing your drugs. If I give an example from some of the innovation we've done at Quotient, we set up a process where we can make a batch, we can dose it into the clinic within 7 days. The minute you start thinking about doing that, make a batch, dose it, you don't need to do 2 years stability. So if you don't need to use 2 years stability, you don't need to make 50 kilos or something. All of a sudden, you only need to make 10 kilos of. Once you start thinking about what's the fastest way of developing a drug, and then take back to the organisation, how can we deliver key API, key formulation, key clinical trial materials against this new timeline? That's how we'll go from 8 years down to 4 years, which is what Dave challenged us at the beginning. So that ability to harness technology to give you agility really does need people to think differently and think more intensely, sorry about the pun, more intensely about what are they doing when they develop something. So Mark, in your introduction, you reminded me of that Bayer example. This is one of the real things that I've been trying to educate my process chemists over the last sort of 5 years. It feels, when you first go into a project where you're trying to use process intensification or continuous chemistry, oh my God, do I really have to do all of this experiments to gather all of this data so I really understand the process? Why can't I just throw it in the batch reactor and see what happens? So forcing people to actually think through, what's your chemistry doing? How are those impurities being formed? How can we change the process? How can we design the equipment that fits that process to deliver the best process going forward? And the best process will be the most sustainable, the most energy efficient. And you can talk to, if you ever talk to a chemical engineer, they get it. If you start to talk to the business leaders, they understand, but it's that inertia to try and make that change. And really that's where we've got to work together. I think we are starting to see there are lots of examples. We've done one now. I set my team a challenge to say, can we do a 4-stage chemical process end to end to make us a couple of kilos that we could feed into a clinical trials program? Normally I would get a lot of resistance and say, no, we'll just use our 20-litre batch reactors, we'll bash through it. But we actually could demonstrate that we could manufacture a couple of kilos in 24 hours, whereas if we'd left it in 20-litre batch reactors, it would have taken a couple of months to churn through that amount of material. They had to do a lot more upfront thinking and development work, but the proof error was in the demonstration of the process. And we've taken lots of examples now where we can improve a process not just because we're trying to get to the 10 kilos, but we're thinking about, well, can we substitute a catalyst for a more environmentally friendly catalyst? Can we change the solvents so that in the future, if this does take off, we can more rapidly respond to the increasing demands of the API and keep pace with the development? And that's how I think we'll revolutionise the time it takes.
I want to pick up on one word you mentioned there. There were several words that was going to pick up on, but one stood out for me, which was educate and education. I would want to come back to the panel really on the skills piece. So we've talked about the business case perhaps, and there are opportunities there, how we set the business case. But again, this was something that came out in the previous talk in this room, was around the skills. And do we have the skills and the experience we need to be able to realise some of the benefits of intensification? I'm going to leave that one open and see who wants to come in first.
Can I jump
Go
in?
on then, JP.
Because we're going through this kind of right now, and I think one of the things that's really valuable is people who've done it before, and I think that is the value of actually the last 10 years. Is there is experience out there, and as we heard earlier, you can definitely bring bright young people in and develop them and be building that capability, but not having somebody who has experience and has the kind of scars and all the rest of it, will set you going down the wrong path, and you'll be learning through mistakes as opposed to actually direction. So there's an acceleration opportunity associated with the sharing of skills, capabilities, war stories, etc., to allow that skills development. And there is absolutely a shift required in some of our skills. We heard it just now in terms of how we do development, and the data-driven design components of process development. That's a very different skill set. I think we're starting to see it, and I think actually the more that we sort of see the digitalisation of those processes in education is going to drive that. So a chemist in the future is probably not going to be learning from their lecturer, but they'll be learning from almost a data assistant or some form of AI data fabric to help them. So I think that's going to kind of drive a very different type of skill set coming out. The other major area that we sort of see a gap in skills is that integration. Integrators, automation, control engineers, right from the process design piece. We've been struggling about where do you put that control capability? Is it because in a manufacturing plant, automation capability exists. It's kind of there to keep your control systems running. We're now talking about having self-optimizing flow reactors with AI loops in labs, starting to build control algorithms, starting to integrate that using the continuous equipment in with advanced process control potentially within a pilot setting. So these are new skills in development. We're working out where to put them, and then we're also working out how do we recruit them and build them. So those for me are kind of a couple of skills areas.
Yeah, if I could just dive in on two things. First of a story. Apollo moon mission, the average age of the team that put a man on the moon was 26. Most of them were recent graduates, and there were a few in their 40s and 50s. And that's how they got to an average of 26. So absolutely, young people, they get it, they're really eager, and we've heard this in a couple of talks today. I think the second thing that you have to bear in mind, and we're in process intensification here, but that's just one of the technologies. We've got the net zero, the sustainability, the digital, the automation. All of this falls down if you can't integrate it, and if you can't build a team that can speak different languages and can translate within their team to really try and understand how they can pull together and bring all of this to work integrated together. That's how we make the change.
I think at that point I'm going to move us on to the opportunities, and I think you've set us up really nicely there, Gareth, by bringing in the digitalisation and automation piece. So I'm going to come to Rolf now on this, and I think one of the opportunities that we have is around Pharma 4.0 technology, and that's strong digitalisation, automation and integration activity, and how that might help us accelerate our time to market and reduce the costs. So what do you see from an Emerson perspective those opportunities are, and do they give us maybe a stepping stone to perhaps some of these alternative supply chain models we've discussed?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things already addressed if you look at that from an automation perspective. And Pharma 4.0, one of the elements is also culture. And I think if you look at you need a cultural change in an organization to use a technology or digitalize your platforms. What was said before, if you look at the automation in a large-scale manufacturing site, that's been there for many, many years. But why is that different than what you have in an R&D facility? If you want to go accelerate time to market, you want to have a kind of an easy way to do process knowledge transfer, and you have the resources in an organization with that mindset that can transfer that to the larger scale manufacturing. I think that's where the industry is going to. You can also easily link that into the Bioforum digital plant maturity model. That level 5 is where everybody aspires to go to, that brings that digitalization. It helps you to transfer knowledge from R&D to large-scale manufacturing. It helps you to schedule resources, capacity, and accelerate time to market. But the industry is only at level 2, level 3. And that's, I think, that cultural change, that's this organizational change. But then at the same time, did the technology allow you to make that change? I think the technology over the last 1 or 2 years has really evolved in allowing you to do online scheduling, don't use any spreadsheets anymore around capacity, people, equipment, and also allow you to have an environment that you use in the R&D facility and then scale up without having a complete knowledge of what that new facility is, but you know your process. And that's where we're focusing on from a technology perspective. Our lighthouse, which we don't want to hit, but it's that where we're going to, is that digital plant maturity model. What does that mean for automation? What does that mean for production capacity? What does it mean for time to market? I think we're seeing in the industry a couple of leaders. Let's say that visionary. I want to be there, and we're working with them to develop those products. But it addresses all those challenges that you are facing in the industry.
And Di, if I can come back to you, so we have the automation digital technology platforms as well. What sort of advantages, what sort of benefits does that bring alongside some of the intensified technologies?
Oh, if you do integrate, then the advantages are very substantial. You minimise your footprint, you minimise your energy usage, you speed your time to market. So a few examples. I visited a customer on the West Coast in September 2019. Up to that point, he'd been playing with our entry-level batch formulation unit. And I persuaded him that he should really look at something that was continuous, because that would set him up for the ability to manufacture further down the road. In other words, start with what the end point looks like and work back from that, rather than the traditional, I can do it at small scale, now how the hell do I scale it up? Scaling it down is a different way of thinking about it. And 7 months later, I saw that same customer in a CDMO conducting their first engineering batch. That was pre-pandemic. So it's possible. It's very possible. And that miniaturization and that speed allows us to think of a continuous manufacturing process for an RNA vaccine, whether it be large or small, in other words, pandemic scale or cell and gene therapy, to the point where we have a design for a full RNA, DNA, RNA, lipid nanoparticle, fill finish manufacturing plant, which will fit inside, including the HVAC and all the rest of it, inside a single 40-foot container. Now then you start to think about what can that do, because that allows you to put your therapy delivery right up against the population you're trying to treat.
And on that point, Chris, bringing your therapy delivery to a population you're trying to treat, point of care manufacturing. Yeah, what do we see there in terms of opportunities?
From what Di said. Okay, thanks for the challenge again.
Well, I got the answer.
Yeah. So, points of care in terms of ATMPs, particularly cell therapies, would be a distributed manufacture away from, Ian McCubbin's not in here, so away from CDMOs like Roslin maybe, into hospital settings. All right, so very, very small GMP units embedded within the hospital. And there's two drivers for that. The first really is that a pancreatic islet product, for example, might have a very, very short shelf life. And some examples would be Kymriah's got a 30-minute in-use shelf life, so between 4 and delivery to the patient, you've got 30 minutes, quite challenging. The more advanced CAR T therapy is about 4 hours for Breyanzi and Abecma. Okay, so you've got a bit longer to get from the freezer to the patient, but it's that sort of time frame you'd be looking at. And the second, of course, is logistics. It's very, very difficult, and Ian talked very well to this. If his cells were taken, they've got to go back to Ian alone. So your custody and identity has to be extremely robust within a complicated setting where the cells need to be maintained in liquid nitrogen generally. So those two drivers are putting an emphasis on certain ATMP products away from centralized CDMOs and into decentralized small GMP centres in hospital. Now there's a lot to assume there. First of all, the hospital's got the experience, not just in the manufacture, but also in the regulatory space. That's really important. So MHRA are here today. You'll be aware there was a specials where a clinician could make for 1 or 2 patients a batch. That's not appropriate in this decentralised model. They've got new guidance, the MHRA, on this, and it's worth reading about that if you're interested in it. So regulatory is one. And the second, of course, is just understanding how do you incorporate training. The environment needs to be controlled for GMP. And then trying to get to the patient from where you manufacture it is still something you need to consider very, very carefully. So the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult is also administering the Advanced Therapeutics Treatment Centre, the ATTC, and there's a lot of guidance on that, and I'm happy to walk people through it. So I hope that's a long but thorough-ish answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, coming back to the, enablers, I think not just for for advanced therapies, but I think just for enablers for more distributed manufacturing supply models. I think there's probably a lot we could learn actually from some of the work that went on in the ATTC project. So, yeah. I'm just keeping half an eye on time because we've got just over 10 minutes left, and I would like to give the audience an opportunity to ask a question or two, but I do want to come on finally to the threats, and I'm going to come back to Gareth and JP largely on this as the end users. We've talked about the business case, we've talked about a number of other things this morning, but in terms of some of those barriers to uptake, which are the real ones that we need to worry about from your perspective, and which are the perceived ones that actually, with that change in culture and mindset, we might be able to get over? So Gareth, do you want to start us off on that maybe?
The big change is the cultural one, and it has to start within your own organisation, and then it has to, like the onion, go out. I think, again, you have to look at the whole process, by which I mean the whole, everything, clinical supply all the way back to drug substance. You can't just make a change in isolation. Distributed manufacturing, again, you can't do that in isolation because the whole configuration of a market has to be going in your direction as well. So you certainly can't do it alone. So I think the opportunity there is communities of practice and to collaborate with your peers, so other CDMO companies, but also network across the client base and find out where are they seeing the challenges and the opportunities in the future as well, and try and work together collectively to lift the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, we heard right at the outset, we have a terrible carbon footprint. So process intensification will contribute, but some of these other changes in the way we approach manufacturing drugs will also contribute that. We're part of a Horizon Europe program. It's called Eternal, and it's looking at sustainable pharmaceutical manufacture from cradle to grave, right from how do you manufacture the pharmaceutical in the first place, but also what happens to the blister packets at the end so they don't just get discarded. So can we actually look at that whole supply chain and really think about where are the parts of it to go after and work collaboratively to make a change?
The community of practice point is one I'm just going to pick up on, really, just as an opportunity to remind the audience that one of the activities we are delivering through our Innovate UK Transforming Medicines Manufacturing programme is a Transforming Medicines Manufacturing Community of Practice. Some of you may have indeed registered for a launch event. Courtesy of the train strikes, we're having to relook at that, and there'll be more information shortly, but I would draw your attention to the Innovate UK Knowledge Transfer Network website for more information on the community of practice. And I think to Gareth's point, one of the reasons we've established that is to enable some of these cross-organisation, pre-competitive discussions to help us move forward in a number of these areas. Does anybody else on the panel want to come in perhaps on some of those real or perceived barriers to uptake? Does anybody else have anything to add?
Just from me, I think it's just the amount of change that, and the phrase was used earlier, which I really quite liked. It's about how much juice do you get for your squeeze, kind of thing. And there is just so much change within the industry. We talk about oligonucleotides. There's an array of modalities. We're seeing digitalisation, so we're seeing that being introduced across our development and manufacturing and supply. There's a real risk that because things are moving so much in so many places, that they aren't coordinated, they aren't end-to-end, they aren't brought together, and we miss the opportunity because people are effectively having to fall back on known ways of doing things, and the size of the changes, the size of the opportunity associated with the intensification of a manufacturing process versus everything else the business is looking at. It just becomes sort of too much. So I think just the amount of change going on and making sure that we use that as a driver rather than as a barrier.
Thank you. I'm going to open up the floor now to questions, so if anybody does have a question, please raise your hand. Please tell us who you are and where you come from, and ask away whilst you've got them here. Go ahead.
Dr. Janet Ferneyho, I'm a director in Syneos Health, so I help pharmaceutical companies to operate better. And I don't know why I put my hand up first, because I'm trying to find a polite way of asking this question. I don't know if I've got there yet. Really, really great discussion. Absolutely phenomenal. I particularly like Gareth's comment about the Apollo mission was staffed by people on average who are 26 years old. If I were a 26-year-old woman, and I'm double that, sat in this room, particularly if I come from an ethnic minority, and this is the not very polite bit, with the greatest of respect, if this is the view I have of my industry, how do we get more diversity into this industry? Because what you have said loud and clear is this is not a tech play, this is a change, this is an innovation, this is a mindset, this is something that requires diversity of thought.
Yeah, so let me answer that. I get where you're coming from. I can't change the way I am, of course, but in the cell and gene therapy field, there is an incredible amount of diversity. I think I first experienced that when I went to the third large pharma I was in, and of course you see a lot of gender homogeneity here, but it's the other way around in the cell and gene therapy field. And my entire team is of one gender that's not mine. Which is interesting in its own right, but also from around the world, quite literally. So once I'm gone, I can assure you, you will not be seeing the same row of faces, maybe in 10 years' time. Yeah.
Can I pick that up? For 28 years, out of the University of York, has been run a programme called Children Challenging Industry. A stunning programme, in that it's had success, but boy is it pushing water uphill. It starts at primary school. I mean, the Children Challenging Industry programme starts at primary school and looks to deal with youngsters to give them some confidence about science being cool. But actually it starts with the teachers as well, because 92% of the teachers at primary level have never encountered science in any shape or form beyond their GCSE dual science. So this is, I mean, you're absolutely bang on the money. I don't know what the answer is. There is certainly not a silver bullet, boy, are there quite a lot of people trying to do something about it, but it's an awfully difficult dial to move.
Can I add some more to that? So I run a 220-acre science park in Kent, which was previously built and wholly owned by Pfizer. And that skills piece is a really important part of my role as a Chief Business Officer. So we do a lot of outreach work. So we sponsor Discovery Planet, which is a shop front in Ramsgate, which is run by 3 women who are Science and Technology Funding Council funded. They run workshops for kids, school kids during the week, and then they open it up to the public at weekends. So they have parents and grandparents coming in to do these workshops. We run a community lab within our site. So Pfizer help us run that in partnership with Canterbury Christchurch. We bring teachers into the site to teach them how to teach chemistry in an applied setting. And we bring school kids in, and then we run a science jamboree for school kids right across the county of Kent. We're now looking at how we replicate that for the digital and data side of things, because we see that actually unless we're skilling that whole community in the data and digital side, that's not enough to deliver the workforce of the future.
Well, I make a comment on that one. It's as a technology supplier, we're facing the same problem, and it's interesting to see if you look at the education. What you just said, it's in general not a lot of people that are interested in technology anymore. We're more interested in banking, lawyers, finance, and what have you. So for us, it's very hard to find well-educated technology people globally, not only in Europe. And then the second challenge is how can I make that diverse? And not only diverse from a gender perspective, but also diverse from a cultural perspective. And that drives, and I'm leading a team with half of my team is diverse, and that brings so much more from mindset, energy, drive, and different perspectives. So I'd like to hear certainly how you're doing that, certainly from an Amazon perspective, maybe Amazon in the UK, because we're looking at the same problem. And I also don't have a silver bullet, but I want to solve that problem because it works if you have a diverse team.
It's also really interesting because I was on a panel around this diversity subject not that long ago, and there was a lady who ran an SME in the biotech space, and she said that I've worked so hard on diversity. She said, I've looked really hard at ethnicity, females and males, she said different backgrounds, and she said I was literally sitting patting myself on the back when I realised that every single person that we employed had a postdoc. And she said, I'm thinking, where's the social mobility within this team? So one of the reasons that we do so much outreach work is we're in Thanet, which is a very socially deprived area of the UK, and so we see it's really important not just to promote the university opportunity, but also the tech and lower level skills within the
Because a university degree doesn't really mean that you have all the energy and drive. There's people, you see that in leaders in the world of tech companies that have no degree, and they have.
I have a comms degree, but I'm running a science park with a biology focus. That's my only science education, so I think it's really important to show the opportunity within the sector.
Absolutely.
And one of the outputs of Children Challenging Industry is the fact that girls have their aspirations raised more than boys.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Absolutely.
I'll say. At that point, I'm going to bring this session to a close. Thank you for an excellent question. And I'll say, it certainly wasn't exactly the panel I was hoping to pull together. I did try. But we are where we are, and we've had an incredible discussion. So with that, thank you very much for your attention. I hope that's been a good session. I do just have a couple of plugs before we wrap up. The first of which, again, I'm going to make no apologies, is an Innovate UK plug for anybody who is interested in de-risking, perhaps bringing forward some of the technologies we've talked about this morning. We will very shortly be announcing our flexible, agile, scalable and sustainable technologies for medicines development and manufacturing competition. That launches on the 26th of September. I'm looking at Rachel and she's nodding, so that's good news. And the competition brief is live on IFS, so good luck in finding that. The other thing, just to draw to your attention then, is that we now have a short 10-minute interlude whilst we make our way way into the next two sessions. For those of you who are interested in towards digital transformation of CMC, academic and industry perspectives, with, I believe, Professor Alistair Florence and Ivan Marziano, please stay in this room here. If your interest is manufacturing as a key to achieving net zero, then please take the 10 minutes to make your way back over to MMIC, I believe upstairs in the room we were in first thing this morning. But thanks once again for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you.